obviously, if nobody knows, Nicky Bandini has a wonderful interview with Franco Baresi on The Guardian. And she discusses with him, obviously, everything you would want to know about Baresi, from Milan to defending to what stands out for him. And of course, the derby. Nicky, as in, obviously we can read the article, but to you, I'm fascinated by this because, I mean, I know that for me this makes a difference, but when you interviewed Totti recently and Baresi now, do you have your favorites on who it's easier to speak to, or how is it that sometimes you can get a little bit more? Did you want more juice from Baresi and felt like you had to be knocked down because, you know, there was somebody there stopping you asking all the questions you wanted to ask?
I know what you're getting at here, Mina, because we just talked about this a tiny bit before we did this recording. Yeah, this was so this interview. You get interviews to journalists all different ways, right? You get interviews through personal contacts, you get interviews through agents, you get interviews through clubs, and you get interviews through when a footballer has a particular project. They might be working with a charity, they might be working on their own autobiography, they might have something they want to promote or talk about. So there's all sorts of different ways that interviews happen. And this one came about in the first instance, actually, because Baresi has got an autobiography out. It's a short autobiography. It's in Italian, unfortunately, so I can't give our English listeners any promises about publication of that. But if you speak Italian, it is, oh my God, the title's gone right out of my head. It has libero on it because it's a play on the fact of being free, and his position, which is libero, who sort of plays as a free defender. But really fun little book. Baresi grew up in a very different era, and he talks a lot about his childhood and growing up on a farm. He didn't even have a television until watching the 1970 World Cup, which is sort of extraordinary. But the way it was arranged, even though the book and it was sort of the first point of contact about it, ends up being arranged through the club. And when you are dealing with a club, Baresi is the honorary vice president of AC Milan. Clubs tend to have certain things they don't want you to talk about. I would have been really fascinated to ask Baresi about San Siro, because, of course, there is this gradual, slow, and, in my feeling, quite sad steps being taken to move away from San Siro to build a new modern football stadium for Milan and Inter. I completely understand the logic for it, but emotionally I find it sad, so I would have been interested to get his perspective on that. And that, for instance, was a topic that I started to talk about with Baresi, and as soon as I started to ask him about it, was very quickly told by the representatives of the club in the room that was not a thing that we were allowed to talk about, which is a bummer. So that is, you know, for instance, of how things can happen when it comes to interviews. But I still thought it was an interesting chat. There were lots of topics we did get to talk about that I was really, really interested to talk about with him. So, yeah.
The book is called Libero di Sognare.
That's it, yes. I was trying to work out. I knew I had Sognare in it as well. I just couldn't put it together. That means free to dream.
I felt like so much is on for you. I'm surprised that you even remembered. I know exactly. I mean, for a second there, when I was asking you the question, I was like, wait, is his name Franco Baresi? Like, that's how bad it's gotten.
Well, of course, he did have his brother, Beppe Baresi, played for Inter, which is one of the things that makes them such an extraordinary story. And that's an example of something that I'm sure I would have been allowed to ask about, but just didn't have time to, because you also have time restrictions. But I would have loved to talk to him about his brother. He does write about that relationship in the book. They were on opposite sides of Milan, but Franco was the younger brother, and they had a really close relationship that was really sustaining for him as a timid kid who came up from the countryside to go and live in Milan. And his older brother was there in the same city and could look out for him.
When you think of Italian defending, I always think that Italy produced the greatest centre-backs in the world. I know that, in his opinion, he's a fan of Van Dijk and Marquinhos, as you managed to expose. For you, do you think he was the best defender that we've ever had? I mean, I'm always clinging to my Juve idols, right? And but Baresi was Baresi, right? And there was Maldini afterwards, who will never be forgotten either. But for you, when you think of great defenders, is it him? Is it anyone else?
I think it's generational, isn't it? In the end, we're all most attached, I think, to the players that we actually got to see a lot of. And I'm a little young to have seen some of Baresi's best years. I saw some of them, but by the time I was really getting into football and paying attention, it was more the Paolo Maldini time. So when I grew up, the defender in my head, the one who I sort of viewed as the best in the world and who I think I probably always will, was Maldini. Although I will say I always will have a particular spot in my heart for Cannavaro, just because I saw Italy win a World Cup for the first time, with Cannavaro having one of the best tournaments a defence ever had. Cannavaro is not in the same category as Maldini for overall quality, for what he was all through his career, I don't think. But for that one tournament, he was incredible. So it's hard to frame these things. I do think Baresi, you know, the first World Cup I remember is World Cup 90, but my memory of it is really not a lot. I remember the last couple of games a bit in a fuzzy way. The 1994 World Cup, I was much more aware of football, and I'd watched the tournament with my family, and I watched the final with in actually my dad's hometown in Italy, which is a small town. They had a big screen out, and it was a real sort of event. And it's the first time I've cried over a football game. And so Baresi, of course, had the most extraordinary World Cup in 1994, because he came along at the beginning, was the captain, tore the meniscus in his knee in the second group game, which should keep you out for a couple of months, really, and recovered in 25 days to play in the final, and was brilliant in the final. You know, they didn't concede a goal against Romario and Beppe, who were ridiculous in that tournament. So I do have a real imprint of Baresi from that game. But of course, I also vividly remember that he misses the penalty in the shootout afterwards. So I think I definitely have a memory of him and thinking he was a brilliant defender. I remember that story being told lots by my family when we were heading to the game, that this was this guy who would somehow come back. But I think probably Maldini is the one who I remember more vividly. What about you, Mina?
I think it's a weird thing that, it's the gentleman thing, right? Like, as in, one of the reasons why my idols are my idols had a lot more to do with who they were as men, or how I perceived them to be anyway when I was a child, more than maybe what they could do on the pitch, It's funny how when I get older, I enjoy an Antonio Cassano more than I enjoy anything else in life, just because I like somebody who's so honest about their opinions, even if sometimes you're like, what are you saying? I totally agree, or whatever it is. But growing up, Baresi, Shirea, it was like they were just such good people, and you felt such great authority figures and such great men. And yes, Cannavaro was great, but there was also a part of me that was like, Nesta, he's just so magnificent.
Oh, Nesta was all come wonderful. Naturally
to him.
Yeah.
Right?
Nesta was a wonderful
So I wonder if that had something to do with it, I guess. But what are his thoughts on this current Milan? Do you think that, obviously he knows this is the right way to go. I'm sure that he's really proud of the steps they have taken to really build a future. Do you think they really, they can get back to being Milan? We're talking about the side that has such supremacy over European competition.
Yeah, I think you always have to bear in mind the context of all these interviews. And the context with Baresi is that he is an honorary vice president of Milan. So he's not going to come to an interview and say bad things about Milan. But I still thought it was interesting that when I sort of put him on the spot and was like, can this team win the league? And is the word Scudetto vietato? Is the word Scudetto banned? Which is this narrative we get so often in Italy. I know superstition, can't say the word. And he was pretty sort of clear about that. He said, no, you have to have ambition. You have to acknowledge that you want to do this thing and aim for it. And there's no reason for them to be shy of that. They have the qualities that he thinks they have the best quality of any team in the league so far this season. And I think that personally, I think he was being honest. The way he phrased it, the way the words came out, I think he was being honest about his opinion that they're the team that has played the best football. But even if you don't want to take that at face value, because he's the honorary vice president of Milan, which is a very reasonable position to take, I think you can still say that it's striking for a team that, let's not forget, went 7 consecutive seasons without even being in the Champions League. I think when you have representatives of the club willing to say that in itself is a statement about where the club is, because it's indicative of confidence. And I think that confidence is something that's running through Milan right now. Confidence, not necessarily, when I say that, do I mean confidence that everyone's bullish we're going to win the league, but just that self-confidence to say, yes, we're Milan, we should be trying to win a league, is something that I think was missing for the club for a while.
Okay, everyone, if you didn't catch that, it is Nicky Bandini's interview with Franco Baresi about his book, and that can be found on The Guardian's website. And make sure to check that out.